edition of Expanding Minds. Continuing our conversation about lately I've been doing some writing a research paper on psychedelic mysticism, psychedelic religion, and I dove back into the literature and once again was just blown away by the amount of stuff that's going on, the amount of books, papers, conferences. Psychedelics have always been a very interdisciplinary field, and now all of these disciplines are supercharged with discussions from clinical psychology to history to anthropology, political science. So it's really a dizzying field, and it's the kind of thing that if that was the only thing I was interested in, I'd still be overwhelmed. And one way to deal with this overwhelm, at least one way that I deal with the overwhelm, is to cultivate friendships with people who have a lot to say, who can act both as filters and guides through this crazy jungle of discourse that's surrounding the ongoing complexity and mystery of how do we engage psychedelic plants and medicines, whether they're whether we should even think about them as medicines. I mean, the questions just go on and on and on. And so I'm very happy today to be speaking with Bia Labate, who's somebody who I wanted to meet for a very long time because she's definitely one of the more, how do I say, sort of engaging movers and shakers in the psychedelic world, which features a lot of old white guys. And she's not an old white guy. She's a bit of a firecracker and got her degree, social anthropology, from Brazil, and is currently in the United States. She's probably, in addition to tons of books that she's written, edited, lots and lots of chapters in edited collections. She's also the main editor at Chacruna. It's chacruna.net, I believe, right? And that, which is a great site. It's my favorite site online for smart, well-informed, accessible writing about psychedelic plants. It doesn't have the kookery of reality sandwich. It features a lot of academics, but academics writing intentionally for popular audiences. So it's a very valuable source online for psychedelic issues and psychedelic news. And then Bia also has been curating some of the tracks at the large MAPS conferences. And last year I found myself almost exclusively in the plant medicine track when I attended the big MAPS conference in Oakland, simply because it was the most interesting material in the sense that while new sciences about neurology and clinical research were part of the discourse, at the same time there were also a great deal of attention to indigenous worldviews, to anthropological problems, to political problems related to indigeneity, to the nature of these plants, questions of animism sitting alongside questions of global appropriation, but in a complicated way that wasn't simply reduced to a kind of politically correct position. It was a very rich range of papers, particularly around peyote, which we'll be talking about a little bit. And though a lot of those papers will be coming out in a book, or maybe the book's already out, called Plant Medicines, Healing, and Psychedelic Science, which was drawn from the plant medicine track there. And we'll hopefully touch on some of that stuff today. So Bia, welcome to Expanding Mind.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for all those nice words, though, I already feel scared because you're so articulate and there's lots of sophisticated words in your vocabulary. So while I feel very blessed with your opening words, I also feel a little bit threatened that I have to be as smart as you.
No, but you're so accomplished. I feel like it when I saw the list of all your papers and books. I felt like a tiny little mole because I've cranked out some things over my more years on the planet than you. So it's equally admiration and envy here. One thing I didn't mention though that I would like to start out talking about is this wonderful looking conference you had organized over the last few years. It just took place in February in the state of Jalisco in Mexico on sacred plants of the Americas. And the few things I've read about the conference made it seem very exciting. A lot of indigenous presenters, questions of plant politics, of appropriation from the West, and it was all held in Spanish. So even if I had gone, I would not have been able to read very much of it. So I'm going to have to ask you, tell me more about what went down at Sacred Plants of Americas, like what you were intending to do. In a way, it was kind of like a way for you to bring the Bia Labate concerns into the world of psychedelic conferences. There's so many psychedelic conferences now, and Sacred Plants of Americas looked really special to me, as far as I could judge. So what was your hope with the conference, and what actually went down?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for asking that. That's, actually the topic that is more dear to my heart right now, because it was really, really amazing. And we're very happy and feeling very blessed and very lucky. It didn't go just well. It went excellent. We were very idealistic since the beginning. And, it started with writing a grant proposal for Open Society Foundation. And that process and back and forth took 1.5 years. And then it took us another year to organize the conference. Basically, my assistant and I, Horacio Guevara and I, and then we had later down the road the collaboration of a group that we co-founded called Collective Drugs, Politics, and Culture. So some other great colleagues all doing voluntary work. And the conference aimed to make a dialogue between things that I think that are normally separated and don't dialogue. So on the one hand, the traditional use of plant medicines and indigenous people, ritual, religion, shamanism. On the other hand, drug policy. So, the movement of legalization, criticism of the paradigm of prohibitionism, and all proposals for other models of regulation. And on the third level, the discussions around the therapeutic potentials of psychedelic plant medicines or other substances that are not plant medicine, maybe plant medicine based or somehow inspired in the knowledge of plant medicines. So these universes, they normally don't dialogue very much. For the folks in drug policy normally don't care a lot about what indigenous people do and their problems and their issues. And scientists in more mainstream, like clinical settings, frequently don't know anything about the traditional use of drugs, and indigenous people are often kept off the loop of all of this discussion. So we try to weave all of this together. And we also had a very idealistic point of view that education should be free and accessible to all. And I was feeling particularly irritated and annoyed with the progressive commercialization and bureaucratization of the field of psychedelic science and plant medicines. As they become more and more mainstream, more and more players that are from outside this universe are looking into this, and more people, start to look at these topics as job opportunities and stuff, which is okay in certain levels. But we just found things are getting too much, commercialized and sometimes dealt without those roots or those tenderness or those, feelings that inspired a lot of us. So we wanted to make a point, and we made the conference entirely free. So that was awesome. The other point that was awesome was that we're very tired of tokenization of indigenous people and, putting one here or one there to say, oh, we care about indigenous people. And of course that it's still like, Western or outsider or hegemonic models that it's a conference and stuff, but we really tried to make a different format and give indigenous people more space. So we had 2 indigenous people in the scientific committee of the conference, and we considered all the indigenous people as our keynote speakers, as a kind of form of decolonization of, hierarchies and knowledge. So If you were a PhD, you would have 20 minutes to present. If you were indigenous, you had at least 40 or more. So that was nice. It's also, harder to get this, especially the elder guys, to tell them, you have 10 minutes or 15 to present. Because indigenous meetings frequently go on from dawn to dawn and or dawn to dusk. Forgot the correct word there, from the sunrise to the sun going down, and everybody speaks, and the discussions go on and on forever. So we try to, to speculate on how we could make a format that was more friendly. In the end, it was still a conference format, but we were more open to giving them more space and being a little bit more relaxed about certain protocols. And, there were some artistic expressions and poetry and singing and playing instruments. And also we didn't get indigenous people out of the blue, just to have them there, put them all in a bus and say, hey, here, attend. But these connections were made very carefully, and they were weaved, with time and tenderness and attention. And basically, because we don't know everything, we are modest to recognize that. So we get people that actually know, and people that are actually solid and have deep connections in communities, to be the mediators between the conference and the community. So I worked closely with a number of different anthropologists and colleagues that have deep ties of decades into indigenous communities. So every of our guests was, really connected and had real attention, and had somebody that talked to them, and we put their bios and, their abstracts. We discussed with them what they were going to talk about, and we asked their opinions on what they thought about the conference. So we had a very mind-blowing, for example, roundtable of the Wirarika or Huicholas that was led by my dear friend and colleague Diana Negrin. Her father was a pioneer in the 70s in the Sierras Huicholas in Mexico, and they talked, on the perspectives of peyote conservation and land and autonomy issues from their point of view. But as you see, I like to talk, and I can go on and on. So
yeah. Well, it's fun.
Me.
I was enjoying just sort of getting a picture of this wonderful conference and wishing that I had been there. But let's stop and talk about the peyote thing. I mean, again, the plant medicine track last year at MAPS was very, very interesting, because so many issues are raised. Issues of cultivation versus, appearing in nature, issues of land rights, control, tensions between, traditional users and new users. I mean, there's so many interesting things that are overlapped there. So I would just like to hear a little bit more about what came up, because if I remember correctly, the conference took place on Wirarika land as well. So there was some kind of special relationship there between even where the conference was situated and that particular kind of cosmology. So what are the main things that are happening? I know there's a lot of issues about land rights, and there's issues about the potential destruction of natural sources for peyote due to the demand. So when the Wirarika were presenting their kind of perspective, what were the main things they were emphasizing?
Okay, just a little remark. It's not that it was held in Wirarika territory, but the conference was in Lake Chapala. That is the largest lake of Mexico, and there is a spot in the Lake Chapala that is called Isla de los Alacranes, that for the Huichol has another name, and that is considered a sacred point in their cosmology. So just a clarification, they don't necessarily live in the sacred lands. For example, Virikuta, that is, the heart of peyote territory, is a place that they migrate to. Like they migrate to this ones to do peregrinations and offerings. And that was also interesting because the elder Maracame, he told us that after the first day, there were a lot of controversies and dispute, that he was feeling upset, and he was, bothered, that the land felt bothered, and it was too much talk and too much anger and disagreement, and that we needed to do an offering. And he called some of the abuelos, the elders that were present, and they went doing an offering in this island as a kind of part of the conference, which I think really, in the end, I saw myself, as an outsider looking at this again, alterity, these other ways of meaning, and asking myself, okay, you're an anthropologist, what do you think about this? And do you believe in this? And it was an intense moment for me. We woke up very early, and then we took a little boat. It was also very beautiful. And I think that offering definitely played a role, because the closing of the conference was so beautiful and so magical with, I can talk more about that if you want. But coming back to your question, what happened in the conference was that the Canadian first Real Majestic, I don't quite know the correct name now, can't remember, but the main mining company that is settled in Virikuta, they send representatives to the conference. So the conference ended up acting like a sponge to conflicts that were happening in the region, because this has been an ongoing battle. And I don't think we have any time to go in details here, because there's also a lot of topics. But in one word, the authorization to have mining concessions was given by the government. There were huge protests, huge alliances between more hippies or new age or conservationists or ecologists or intellectuals and indigenous people against this concessions. And then, through different legal strategies, this company has managed to be settled there again. And then some Wirarika have put an amparo, which is like a protest trying to stop these concessions. And so the mining went there. And, there's also internal divisions among the Wirarikas themselves. So there's one entity in particular that is composed by indigenous people that is in favor of the mining. And they were all, also dressed in their traditional, clothing. And some campesinos, some rural people, the hereditarios, that are local landowners, that are also on the side of the mining. So in many ways, it was like you were watching some kind of film without, subtitles on a foreign language, because it was hard to decipher the discourses. And they had they took the mic every round after every person spoke. They came there to speak and to create troubles and to challenge, the conference and the presenters and the organizers and the whole narrative. And the kind of narrative they put is the foreigners, the hippies, the new age, the outsiders, the university people, they are saqueadores del peyote. They are people that steal peyote from the desert because they are traffic dealers, because they are making a profit selling peyote. And their interest in protecting the land is a self-interest of obscure reasons, because they are interested in making a profit and having their own self-personal benefits. And they create defamation, and they spread lies about the mining, which gives work to the people, which is healthy, which is providing. It's a little bit like there's a parallel going on in the Amazon, where the ruralists, do you say this word, that own land, they have started an investigation against the Brazilian Anthropological Association and FUNAI, that is the Indigenous Representative Association, claiming completely absurd, weird things these anthropologists have obscure interests in the Amazon because they are funded by European countries, such as Norway, the government gives a great support to the Amazon protection, to environmentalist entities. So the discourse of the ruralists is to say, these people, they're selling the Amazon. They don't have, we have to protect the sovereignty of our land, and they have foreign money to protect, to try to sell this land to Norway. So it's like people like me or, my colleagues, we would be the ones with obscure interests in protecting the desert because we have some kind of, we're obscure interests. And it was just interesting because, I mean, they defended points of view that seem very authentic, like, we're against legalization, we're in favor of peyote, we're against the invasion by people that are stealing peyote. But in fact, it's the other way around. So I had a little moment there. I interrupted the discourse and I said, I am one of those foreigners. If you have a problem, you can ask me directly. What is my agenda and what are my intentions, and I'm happy to share. But that the presence of them didn't scare us away and didn't make us feel bad. On the contrary, we felt good. We felt that our conference was making some impact, and they were there just the first day, and then the other days they didn't show up. So I thought that was kind of nice too. They tried to take it over, but it didn't work. And they left.
Well, I like this question though about your agenda, and I'll phrase it this way: is that you're at a very interesting intersection. You're a pedigreed social scientist with your own career interests. You produced a lot of material. You're very visible in the exploding world of psychedelic science and discourse and politics. And at the same time, you have your own personal commitments and investments. What brought you to this work in the first place? You talked earlier about the kind of bummer of the bureaucratization and the what looks on the horizon, on the near horizon, to be new forms of like capitalist interest in these medicines and private companies, and the way in which that's changing the whole scene, just the whole way that people think about these things, talk about them. And while some of that is necessary as part of the decriminalization process and part of the broader healing discourse, obviously it's also kind of a bummer. And so I also sense that that's part of what you're interested in, is to figure out how to acknowledge this new world, but also to keep some of that commitment or some of those investments in other ways of being with these things that are perhaps less bureaucratized. So that's all a long setup to say, how would you describe your agenda as someone who's devoted your life to, and a lot of work to, working in multiple levels on multiple planes with this material and with these ideas and discourses?
Wow. I'm not going to ask a rain check on that. Let me think how I'm going to answer that. Well, it's. I guess I would recap this. I had a conversation with Auke. She is one of the indigenous women she's with Chaw, and she was in the conference, and she had a spectacular closing statement in her, in the end, in the conference, we made each representative, they spoke in their own language. And we just, some sang, some played instruments, one made a statement, one made a poetic thing, the other made a joke. And she started to talk in her talk, and she started to talk about the song of this man that goes to the desert and he's looking for peyote, and he doesn't, he doesn't find peyote, and then he looks and looks, and then the emptiness, se torna su llanto. It becomes his cry. And as she starts to say that, she kind of starts to cry, like her voice trembles and her eyes come full of water. And there's that minute that, everything froze and everybody just cried together with her. And then she said, we don't want to be anything. We don't want to be special. We don't want to be, important. We don't want to be exotic, and we don't want our medicines to be incredible things to heal. I don't know if she said like this, but something along these lines. We just want to be, we just want to be left alone. And then everybody, it was very powerful. Everybody stood up and clapped. And afterwards, I came on and I said, what motivated me? And I know I told the story on how the first time I went to Mexico and I was going to stay there for 1 month. I was studying social sciences. And then my father took me to the airport and he said, are you coming back, Bia? And I thought, well, that's a weird question because of course I'm coming back. What do you mean? But the truth is that I didn't come back for a while. I stayed 1.5 years traveling. And in this trip, I had the incredible chance to try peyote in the desert and to eat mushrooms in Huautla de Jimenez and to try LSD too for the first time. So it was like 20. And that really changed my mind for everything. It just like taught me who I was as a human being. And, made me understand that I belong to planet Earth, made me understand that I'm a part of nature and a part of everything, and just give me a deep spiritual understanding and relief as a human being and, as a living thing on top of this other thing, I remember I had such a strong experience with mushrooms. I looked to the sky and I saw the moon and I felt a great relief because it was something I could recognize. And I said, okay, I'm still here. Everything good. So that trip really changed my life. And I kind of felt inspired. And years later, I got to know ayahuasca, like 5 years later in Brazil, which was another incredible, beautiful blessing and revelation. And I just felt inspired by my own experiences. So the base of everything for me is personal, and it's my heart, and it's a spiritual thing. And my motivation is that I think there's lots of ignorance and there's lots of prejudice and misunderstanding. And we need to do a bridge between these traditions and our world. And they need to be more respected, more understood, and more appreciated. And the people who have been practicing these traditions and their territories and their land and their all their systems, the kinship, the language, the cosmology. It's a wonderful universe of incredible knowledge and different ways of understanding the world. So there is not just one paradigm and one worldview and one main way to be on this planet. And indigenous people teach us alternative ways. And I think we have a lot to learn with them. So I just feel this call to study these topics. It's like they make me curious and I want to study them. And then I want to write about it. And then I want to help advance, the discourse on protection. And I just feel this rage when I see a complete alienated prohibitionist judge or police officer or psychiatrist or, therapist or just a regular human being saying all kinds of absurd things about things they don't know. Yeah. And these have deep racist roots and deep, connection, deep roots in moral and religious paradigms that inform our mentalities and our societies. And I think we need to have more clarification. So my inspiration is personal, but it's also political.
Yeah. So one question on that is that, just even looking at something like the MAPS conference, where on the one hand, you can see how as official neuroscience and clinical bodies and above board researchers become interested in these topics, there's a tendency towards a kind of familiar Western dominance, and then along with that come racist attitudes, or there comes pejorative attitudes towards, let's say, indigenous worldviews. The idea that, hey, these things don't belong to these people; they're just part of Earth, and if we can spread them and use them for healing, what's the problem with that? We need to bring in the Western paradigm to make that happen. Blah blah blah. And I can see very much how that is in tension with the kinds of values that you're talking about, both personal values, but also indigenous values. But the question I wanted to ask is actually about the aspect of contemporary Western psychedelia, or people who are interested in plant medicines, beyond the term psychedelics, whether they call them entheogens or just look at it as ayahuasca and blah, blah, blah. But the people for whom the indigenous are already figures of wisdom and power. And I'm thinking about that story you just told about the woman's sob-inducing song, about how we don't want to be special. We don't want to be like exotic. And obviously when people, especially when Westerners, turn and try to engage indigenous people, indigenous sources of wisdom, indigenous cosmologies, the first thing they do is to exoticize, turn them into sources of power, revere them, and misunderstand them. And we, obviously many of the problems that are currently going on inside global ayahuasca shamanism have to do with the kind of construction with the Western ideas about who a shaman is and how they operate, which are often very disjunct from what you actually have on the ground. So how do you think, looking forward, and the fact that we need to build bridges between indigenous cosmologies, indigenous people, and the exploding world of psychedelic medicine, how do the people who are sort of already into indigenous wisdom, what are some errors there? What are some ways to improve that side of the equation? The people who are already ready to have that worldview, what are they not aware of? What are they missing? What are some ways to improve that relationship?
You make a lot of difficult questions, man. You're gonna have to pay me a dinner or something sometime.
Deal. It's a deal.
I don't have answers. It's not easy. I mean, I think we have to keep on doing what we're doing already, and more. It's not like I have a kind of magical solution that's gonna fix the problem. I think we need to, I would say that one of the main messages of this conference and of this closing is that we take indigenous people for their plant medicines, but you can't take a part for the whole. This is not about just the plants and just about that aspect of the culture. So it's about a much larger cosmology, and it has to do with autonomy of the land and autonomy of rights. So one way to start, it's this decentralization, this de-obsession on the plants itself, and thinking about these cultures more in their integrity, in their whole. This is not easy, because the fact is that the indigenous people that don't have these trendy substances, they are not so much in our radar. And we are also not imitating all kinds of practices that they do, like, for example, sitting on a pile of ants and having ants bite you, or being sobbed with a special kind of leaf that has little spines. Like, we don't incorporate all kinds of indigenous rights. We incorporate certain rights that are more appealing to us. And I think we just have to study more and learn more, and stop with this fetishization of indigenous people. I see a lot of that in the whole idea of ayahuasca diets, and people repeat and repeat and repeat and reinforce those diets. But does anybody have a clue that those have to do with hunting taboos? They have to do with how you take the bones out of the game, and they have to do on which time of the year you can hunt or not, and the negotiations that you have to do with the shaman pig, and whether you can hunt certain animals or not. So we just published a book called the expanding world ayahuasca diaspora. That's a continuation of our previous book, which was the world ayahuasca diaspora. So it's kind of like mission number 2. It's a continuation, and I have a chapter, a co-authorship, talking about the diets and this idea, proposing that we stop to reflect a little bit better on, like we get certain aspects of the practice, but we don't get others. So I think regarding ayahuasca, for example, a lot of people have kind of noticed the topic of witchcraft. The great majority doesn't know anything about that, but the ones that are more initiated or more familiar with ayahuasca, they will acknowledge, witchcraft exists in the world of ayahuasca. It's not all good. So let's say in a continuum, the more regular person is just totally idealizing ayahuasca healing, ayahuasca flower, ayahuasca love, ayahuasca salvation, redemption. The Amazon will be healed. The humanity will be healed. We're going to be saved. This is the last thing we needed to wake as a species. That's one style. The other style is more already, aware that there is dark and light in the ayahuasca world, and that there is witchcraft, and that, healing is ambiguous with harming, because sometimes protecting yourself can be healing others. Like if you're attacked by somebody, will attack back, take that dart out of you and throw it back. There is that. And then there is this idea, but we are not into witchcraft, and we're combating witchcraft. But witchcraft also has a role in traditional cultures. Like witchcraft is a means of, control, of social control, and it can play a role in division of goods, and in more equality, in policing other people's behaviors. So I think that what we have to do is a true humble process of trying to learn about different peoples and their worldviews in their own logic, in their own paradigm, through their own lenses, and be really open to new ways of understanding nature and culture, relating to other species, to non-humans, to the ancestral, to the invisible world, to other, deep ontological and epistemological notions. But then again, I am an anthropologist. Maybe, I can't ask that from everybody, but that's what inspires me. So in one word, nothing more boring than, a bunch of Westerners just talking about themselves and their ayahuasca experience. 1 million documentaries about ayahuasca every day, 1 trillion blogs, 1 trillion news. But what is the homework of trying to understand what it is for indigenous people? How many ayahuasca documentaries have really tried to talk to any indigenous person or anthropologist or researcher or indigenous activist or any kind of, person with anything to say beyond my own healing, my own trauma, my own childhood, my parents, my this, my that. So I think we need to, it's the process of learning about this should be a process of us being more humble about our own values and our own worldviews. And unfortunately, I don't think ayahuasca necessarily helps in that, but
No.
it could.
No, I hear you very much. I'm all ears, and that's one of the, I was joking before we started recording about how I kind of liked it better before, when it was a much smaller world, and where a lot of the intellectuals who were involved, or people who were thinker, reader, study, researcher types, a lot of them weren't even attached to universities. So it was a very different world, 30 years ago, 25 years ago even. And one of the problems that I think happens with the rise of psychedelic science is that the tension between science and the humanities, which is a larger issue, even between hard science and social sciences, which is already a big part of things, it gets exacerbated. So what it does is it takes away the encouragement for people to do their homework, to read, to talk to anthropologists, to talk to indigenous people, to open up to the issues that are involved with moving between different paradigms, with different ontologies. And whether we use fancy terms or whether it's a more visceral understanding, those processes clearly do happen. Lots of people go through them, and they wind up on the far end with much subtler views. Personally, I've known a lot of kind of, neo-tribal hippie ayahuasca people, who I knew when they were in their early 20s and they were kind of naive, and then checking in with them 10 years later, some of them have just learned an extraordinary amount and done an incredible amount of work of actually learning about these different dimensions, about creating sophisticated bridges with indigenous perspectives and historical perspectives. But the emphasis on psychedelic science now and on this sort of, almost vampiric paradigm of healing means that it's easier for people not to do that work because most of the scientists don't do that work because they're scientists and they often have very simplistic ontologies and they're not very interested beyond a kind of superficial, gesture towards indigenous healers. They're interested in medicines. They're interested in isolating, substances from whole cultural plant complexes. They're interested in control, and they're interested in the individual who is healed. If they're clinicians, it's always about the individual who is healed, and it's not about the collective, the social, the cultural domain. It's just not part of the engine of science. So it's a real interesting problem how to kind of lure people who are sincere seekers, but to help them avoid the traps of healing narcissism and to embrace the ambiguities that are involved with trying to understand other people, trying to understand history, trying to understand, cultural dynamics, anthropology. Those are hard things to do. There's no answer. You never get resolved. It's always a kind of ambiguous, hopeful, frustrating kind of process. It's not a red pill or a blue pill. And so that seems to be part of the work now is to continue to open up those questions and to resist the growing tendency to scientize these things, bureaucratize them, come up with simple medicine-oriented paradigms to describe them. And those things have value, but left to their own devices, I think they have a potential to make things even worse.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think I hear what you say about how it was back in the day. I think we have to, be pragmatic about this. And I think you're older than I, but avoid this nostalgia. I am basically a pragmatist. Like, what do I do is the following. I see that something is going to happen. And like a conference that I think, they're kind of alienated to what they're doing, in fact. And then there's that existential issue. Should I participate or not? Should I help or not? I think, yes, I'm going to help because it's better with me than without me, modestly. And, also talking to the media, like, should I talk to this guy or not? Because, he's... maybe he's changing my words, he's editing my words, he's giving a whole different interpretation. But the bad guys out there, they don't have this kind of existential problems. The psychiatrist that is going to sit and say, ayahuasca is a toxic potion that can give you heartbeat and kill you, and this is a Schedule 1 substance. Like, the guy obviously never could tell what is even ayahuasca if you left him in a garden and tell him, identify. Have you drink? Can you see what it is? But he's feeling super comfy in saying all that kind of thing that crosses his mind that he studied in, hallucinogens 1 in 1972 in his course somewhere. So this sort of people, I think we have to always remember that the dilemmas that we have inside the psychedelic community is like we're like family discussions. We are discussing about ourselves and we're fighting about ourselves because the real enemies and the real people that we have to remember are the major, corporations and transnational initiatives of like lumber and agricultural developments, oil development, invasion of mining initiatives in the desert, attacks to the Amazon, and projects that severely threaten and endanger indigenous people on the one side, and on the other side, the bureaucrats of the drug war. So that's what, that what's get my fuel when I'm feeling a little bit down about my battles. I tried to watch some of more mainstream, line of thinking, and also did that by attending anti-gay protests in Guadalajara, where I lived for many years. So it was an anti-gay march, 50,000 people, that they had all kinds of slogans, for example, saying things like biología, no ideología, biology, not ideology. Like that was one of the slogans they had. So I went there to educate myself on the importance for us to keep on, our activism for human rights and for better understanding. And yes, as the field grows and grows, it becomes more and more complex, and it becomes harder and harder to know if we're really one community anyway, and what are all the vested interests in this kind of conference and in this kind of field. And it's the same situation of our conference. You need to go, you go to a conference and you need freaking subtitles to what's going on, because it's like you don't even know how to read politically all the forces and the vectors that are disputing. So that's we live in very challenging times.
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to get to one other topic we'd mentioned earlier. Another paper that you have that you have in the plant medicines book has to do with the legal status of ayahuasca circles in the U.S. Now, there's a lot of sort of, because we have some space under the exception clause to allow for indigenous use. So there's Native American Church has gotten a pass for decades, and now people are like going, hey, can we use the UDV decision to make more space for legal ayahuasca circles if they attach themselves in certain ways? And I'm curious just to hear a little bit about what's happening in that zone, since it's something you've researched. Have there been any successes? Have there been some failures? What are people trying to do in order to make more of the underground ayahuasca circles that are already happening in the U.S. Legitimate and above board?
So I think this is the hottest topic of ayahuasca in the US right now, because everybody's exhausted of being underground and everybody's upset with the drug war, and people are trying to get organized and legal. But the fact is that it's illegal. It's just legal for the UDV and for some chapters of the Santo Daime. Both are Brazilian ayahuasca religions that have a strong Christian background, but also Afro and esoterico and indigenous, but mainly our religious organizations. Everybody out of that is on a complicated situation. So there is a people are trying to rely on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that would maybe allow them to have their existence. And then what is required in this regard is that you would have to prove three things. One is that you're religious in nature. And two is that you're based in a sincere belief. And three is that the prohibition of consuming your sacrament is burdened by the government. The fact that you can't use your sacrament because of legal reasons would be a burden to your religion. And therefore your religion can't exist. So it's a pretty complicated situation. The idea of how you define religion is pretty complicated, because there is not a definition of religion per se. What exists are court cases that have indicated, religious traits that people could try to prove they have. And this, of course, follows more mainstream definitions of religion. So things like, do you have a founder, a prophet, or teacher? Do you have writings? Do you have gathering places? Do you have keepers of knowledge? Do you have ceremonies or rituals? Do you have a structure or organization? Do you have certain holidays? Do you have certain clothing? Do you have means of propagation? The other thing is that you have to prove, like, let's say you sit down and you write all of those, but you have to prove that your religious beliefs are sincere and not ad hoc, that you just didn't hire Bia Labate or Erik Daves to write them for you, but that you actually believe in them and that you practice them. And then the other thing is whether your sacrament is fundamental for your religion, because if you say, you know, I use several sacraments, so the government will say, well, don't use this and that then, because these are forbidden. Or if you say, I don't need my sacrament to practice my religion because I have my prayers, so don't use a sacrament then, just keep to your prayers. So the DEA has put a mechanism that you could file an exemption to prove that you have a religious use of a substance. And it's a kind of sweet little cool document. I have it on my website, bialabate.net, under the category legal texts. I have a whole link there for this discussion. And I find it just very fascinating, you know, the debates on how do you define all of that. And 2 ayahuasca groups have filed for an exemption. One is Soul Quest, and the other one is Ayahuasca Healings. Both of them got a lot of visibility and a lot of controversy. One is led by Chris Young, and the other one is led by Trinity. This Trinity one got into a lot of trouble because he started going around claiming he was legal, and he was severely attacked. The fact is that both groups filed the exemption, and we don't know what's going to happen. And maybe the DA is going to, you know, keep on asking them things for years and years. Maybe they give a positive answer. Maybe they give a negative answer. Some people are completely underground and feel that it's a huge threat to even say the word ayahuasca in public. Others go visible and just give, you know, interviews in CNN or announce in Facebook. So there's, you know, different people with different understandings about what are their legal rights, because a lot of people feel that after the UDV case, they are entitled and they have rights, and they feel that their practices are legitimate and that, you know, their religion ought to be protected. But there's different ways of seeing this trauma.
Well, and then this is all complicated by the recent news you told me just before we spoke about an apparent death associated with a ceremony at Soul Quest in Orange County. What can you say about what happened and how you see, you know, the negative effects this might have?
Again, I don't know. Again, I can speculate. You know, all I've seen is in the news. So apparently, somebody went drinking ayahuasca in Soul Quest and died. That makes me extremely sad, and I just want to, you know, send my solidarity and my prayers and my, you know, positive, warm wishes for the family, and say how sorry I am for this news. I think that, you know, when things like this happen, there is just one answer. The answer is called investigation, and we have to find out what happened, because we can't jump to conclusions. And for this, Facebook and things like that are just horrible, because people sit behind their computers and start making all kinds of comments. That is very cruel, because a lot of people were critical of Chris Young because he did this application and he didn't kind of consult with experts and didn't have a lot of agreement that he should do the application. He also did, you know, he did have several sacraments, which is highly not recommendable for you to have if you're going to apply for the DEA. He also kept on doing his activities despite receiving a cease and desist letter from the DEA. And he had a very proactive, has a very proactive approach, and has gone to the media, works with a lot of veterans. There's a lot of reports that he does really great work. And there's a lot of veterans that speak highly of him, and veterans are taken in high regard in the USA, as you know. I say that because I am a foreigner, so this is news for me. But I see that veterans here are kind of the top of the kind of, almost a taboo. Like if it's for the vets, it's okay. I think maybe that gave him a sense of empowerment, or maybe he just felt that he has the right to do all those things. But the fact is that he's on the total, as visible as it gets, not only because he was on the media, but because he filed an exemption to the DEA. And then people start saying, oh, you see, he is really bad practitioner. There has been a death, but we don't know. Maybe the guy, fell from the stairs inside the house. And you can't jump to any conclusions ever, because you can also die just during sex or taking a shower or doing your sleep. And we don't know what happened, so we can't jump into conclusions. This is no evidence that, he was doing anything wrong or that anything was related to ayahuasca. And then there is also the presence of kambo. Please, everybody, not kando, kambo, like the second emphasis on the second syllable. Kambo is a poison of the frog. People also, there's this tendency to find guilt and scapegoat. Oh, it's not ayahuasca, for sure it's kambo. Like, excuse me, who says it's kambo either? Indigenous people have been using kambo for ages, and it's pretty safe. Maybe the guy had a series of previous conditions. Maybe he had taken other substances. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe it was a toxic poison intoxication. And even if it was a death related to ayahuasca or kambo, this doesn't mean that it should be prohibited. Again, the discussion is much more complex and much more, sophisticated, because when we see somebody dying because of an alcohol problem, are we all going to stop? We are going to all take alcohol out of the of the world. Like, it's not like that. Prohibition has bad effects, and I would go further, saying the fact that it's prohibited creates much more complicated scenarios for regulation, screening, proper information harm reduction. If you are, for example, a clinical psychologist in the USA and you want to talk to somebody, screen somebody to drink ayahuasca, maybe you could have a problem, a criminal liability, if this person is a problem drinking ayahuasca afterwards, or with the board of clinical psychologists. So,
Bia, we're going to have to let it go there on these the ongoing complexities. And thank you so much for guiding us through them for a bit for this 1 hour. So I really appreciate you being on Expanding Mind.
Yeah, thank you too.
Okay, so Bia Labate, you can find out more on bialabate.net and also look at shakruna.net. Until next week, keep your minds open.